Welcome to Still Growing in Grace. I'm Mike Zanker. Join me and other amazing guests as we explore and discover better, hope-filled perspectives on biblical texts and difficult themes. Prepare to expand your understanding of God's love and amazing grace. Growing in Grace Ministries Canada and Hope Fellowship, as well as Eastside Church, invite you to enjoy today's program as we dig deeper into what it means to be still growing in grace. Welcome to Still Growing in Grace. I hope you've been enjoying all the conversations we've had, and our topics seem to vary all over the place. Like today will definitely vary from what we've typically talked about. But before we hit the record, we were kind of talking about some difficulties and stresses in life, and how do we address those in our day-to-day while being truly human and honest about our faith, without making it overly religious. And I jokingly was talking with Fred about an acronym of issues, because he and I are both pastors. So I'm bringing this up. That's why I was laughing. That this Christian rules and procedures, church crap, Christian rules and procedures, are a problem. And the more we grow and unlearn these chains that are attached to us by well-meaning people, as they're released, we're seeing the repercussions, the soot of things being burned up, and it's hard in our theology. Our relationships, that we find out what is true, what is not true. We thought people were united because they just loved us. Don't we all believe the same thing? And no, it's not quite like that. And so I think each one of us here have faced lost relationships because we have spoken a little more bluntly and clearly about this deeper journey we're on. And I had somebody call me out a little bit, not call out, but just nicely ask, because I've always talked about a more hope-filled perspective, but I use the word a better and more hope-filled perspective. So the question was, don't people call you out on better? Doesn't that make you us versus them? Doesn't that make you sound a little more entitled? I said, no, because we're always wanting something better. It's not about the other one's bad. It just means sometimes you find something good, but then you find better. And so in our theology, we're finding better. We're finding more hope-filled perspectives that offer better hope. And when you start to talk about it, man, you find out who your real friends are and what actually united you. So as a pastor,
it's a biblical word, better.
Better covenant. Yeah.
Better. The book of Hebrews talks about a better way and a better covenant.
That is true.
See, that very question betrays what you're talking about with the Christian rules and all that, because that keeps you at the same level. You think, I'm glad you didn't mention the name, but that's a ridiculous question when you think about it. It's like saying, do you know the Lord better than you did last month or last year or 10 years ago? Yes. If I didn't know the Lord better than I did 10 years ago, what if I had said to myself 10 years ago, now, wait a minute, I'm putting myself, I'm judging myself on that. Goodness gracious. The whole purpose of life is to know the Lord better and brighter. This whole thing is about growing. And that kind of question, to me, chills it. It absolutely chills it, because you just need to stick to the protocol, stick to the rules. And that's the type of thing that just keeps you in zero growth mode. Yeah. And, some people are scared of growth, or intimidated by it, or just intimidated by it, but it's a natural thing to want to expand. Like you said earlier, what was it you said with the teeth that was good, Mike, a second ago, maybe before the recording, about that growing in
Oh yeah, we can't be fed pablum our whole lives, because we're taught here, spoon fed this, but by the time you're 5 years old, your teeth are growing in full. You can't just be eating pablum. You gotta move on to some other stuff, things you can chew, and then eventually your real teeth grow in, right? So
and Paul talked about going from milk to meat.
Yeah.
Why? Because meat is better. Milk is good for where you were at, but there's something better for where you're going, and as you grow.
Yeah. What if the meat was not just a better list or a deeper list of beliefs, but what if meat is abandoning the certainties
Hmm.
that we have to be given in our Sunday school child faith, and meat
Good.
is actually, embracing the mystery that we really don't know. And so I think sometimes when somebody hears something and says there's something better, maybe there are some at least that feel like they've had it all figured out. So they were told
Right.
they've got God in a box, Randy. They've got God figured out. They just got the wrong box. But then somebody says, yeah, but there's something better, and it kind of throws them off. They're like, wait a minute, I know everything there is to know.
Yep. Yep. That happens, right? The small, cushy arrogance, and they don't. I call it innocent arrogance, because not everybody thinks they've arrived. They just have this confidence they got it all figured out, and everybody else is wrong. And it takes a humbling journey to unlearn that. And so when better is offered, it's good. And by the way, the meat part is not a vegan issue. This is not a vegetarian issue. This is an allegory, just in case somebody gets just gently offended. Just chill, because this is not about that. This is about the meaning of more mature spiritual food. So we are called to grow up, to be fully formed into Christ, right? That's what we're designed for. But when you got all these diaper adults around, it's scary, you know?
Especially those who've been in the faith for a long
Yep.
time.
Yeah, because we assume.
Yeah.
I think our belief system, in a way, is sort of like a pyramid. And that we've got a foundation, a wide foundation, and then above that is an interim, but it's very wide, and it narrows and narrows and narrows to the top. And the things at the top, they're not so dear to our hearts as the things at the foundation. You can kind of mess with the top a little bit, and it won't make that much difference to me, but don't mess with my foundation. So the deeper you get in that pyramid, the more it's painful it's going to be. And I think what happens, if this metaphor is making any sense, I think what happens is that sometimes a suggestion about something at the top means that my bottom is off, and that gets us upset, because now you're telling me my pyramid is all wrong. The whole thing's got to be thrown out. And I think that's, in talking about the transition from milk to meat, my grandson's going to be making that transition from milk to food in a couple of weeks, and we've been talking about it and all. And there is that possibility of the body not being used to the food, rejecting the food,
Mm.
because it's going to take some getting used to, even though the food is necessary for your growth into maturity. And I think that there's a spiritual parallel in that. And that when we start getting presented with the food, with the meat, we want to reject that. It's not the milk I'm used to. It's not what feels good to me. It's not what I've learned. It's not what I know. You're challenging me here, and it's difficult. And there's that tendency to reject it. And like you were saying earlier, Richard, about, do I know the Lord better today than I did, yesterday or a year ago or 2 years ago? And the answer should always be yes. But I'll tell you, when you're in the middle of it, it doesn't necessarily feel like yes, because in the knowing him better, I'm having to let go of things that I thought I knew, and I feel like I know him less.
Mm.
And that's a real possibility. And I think people may get into that, there's a phase in our walk, and we may go through it more than once. We may go through it over and over and over again, where you're being pushed and challenged to understand a better perspective, a better way of understanding our Father. But it means, taking that foundation. There's a part of that foundation that's got to be moved out, and that's painful, and that hurts, and that leaves you feeling like I know less than I thought I knew. But no, you really don't. You're on the journey to knowing him better.
Yeah, I think it's almost like a laser. because when I knew the Lord less, I was more certain about a bunch of things.
Right.
But as I've gotten to know him better, I'm certain about fewer things. But the things I'm certain about, I've never been more certain about. And those things it's a laser focus on his goodness. I know every one of you well enough to know you're more confident in God's goodness today than you've ever been.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
yet there are questions, but I used to think all these rules, these other rules that you were talking about, Mike, they carry the answers. They don't carry the answers. And those are the things, we shuck off and the things we leave behind. And we're left with a laser focus. I think that actually Bill and I had breakfast together this morning. He was doing a wedding up near me where I live. And we were just talking about how wonderful and we've talked about it before, but about how, that pixelated thing we've talked about, to where the picture of Jesus is pixelated, but yet we can see it. And I don't have to have the answers to everything. That's one of the greatest deliverances of all, that I've got to be able to explain everything about God's goodness. Well, I'm never going to know everything about God's goodness, but I want to spend the rest of my life knowing it better and more and more and progressively more.
Right.
But to be delivered, all these rules, though, they think they have it all pinned down, pigeonholed, pressed down, and that's how we achieve righteousness. And I was thinking, when you were talking about the rules, Mike, just this passage came to mind. It says, and this is how religion makes judgment on you. It says, therefore, let no one pass judgment on you. Well, first off, this is in Colossians 2. But he talks about Christ's victory over the principalities, the powers, and the victory of the cross. And then he says, let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. Let no one disqualify you, insisting on asceticism and worship of angels, going on in detail about visions, puffed up without reason by his sensuous mind, and not holding fast to the head, from whom the whole body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments, grows with a growth that is from God. If with Christ you died to the elemental spirits of the world, why, as if you were still alive in the world, do you submit to regulations? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch, referring to things that all perish as they are used, according to human precepts and teachings. These have indeed an appearance of wisdom in promoting self-made religion and asceticism and severity to the body, but they are of no value in stopping the indulgence of the flesh. And I mean, that is a majestic passage. And the elemental spirits, they're also mentioned in Galatians. There's a belief that the elemental spirits, if you can hear this, are demonic spirits that try to lure us into legalism. And that, what we might, whatever that might be, whatever demonic spirits are, it is a demonic idea, to live by the dead letter of things and to live by the law. It's cursed. But at any rate, to die to the elemental spirits means we die to these regulations and we die to these ordinances that religion tries to self-impose on us. And I love this passage, and so many people would look good and like they're really following the rules, and that they're holding to the severity to the body and asceticism and living by these precepts, when really they're not relating to God's presence at all. And that's really at the end of the day, we abandon it. It's all about knowing the Lord's presence. I may know the less about him that I can put into words, but if I know his presence, that's the knowledge we seek. Paul called it epigenosis, which is intensified knowledge of the Lord's presence, of the Lord's palpable personality in his presence. And to me, that you can describe it, but that's only can be experienced. And that's really what we're talking about. These rules and these ordinances, they're not experiential, and they keep us from entering into the experiential. And the things that lift our spirits and the things that give us hope is that's where we grow. We grow in the knowledge of God, with a growth that is from God. And that it's a relational growth. So, I mean, that's it.
You know, Richard, when you were reading that passage, one of the things that stood out to me was a hindrance to this kind of relationship that you're talking about. When he says, don't handle, don't touch, don't taste, that's Old Testament law. He's actually using the Old Testament law in a light that says this is a hindrance to you. And so one of the hindrances of a better way is the misuse of scripture.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even New Testament scriptures. So for a guy who grew up in a fundamentalist church, I knew the scriptures, but I didn't know the Lord of the scriptures, the relationship behind it. So sometimes the better way. I'm trying to think how to say this so I don't just really screw this up. But when I initially went into this process of deconstruction, I think I shared this before. I spent several months not reading the Bible at all.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't, because everything was a trigger that just went back. And all the voices that taught certain things, every time I read a verse, I heard all of that teaching that lifted that verse out of and turned it into a law, instead of the Spirit leading us into knowing Him. And so I thought, Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Wouldn't it have been great to be one of those guys spending time with Him? Because what did they see? What was it like sitting around the campfire after all the work was done and you're just shooting the breeze? I mean, they saw things about the goodness of the Father that we just scratched the surface with what we've been able to read those accounts, but we're missing so much, you know? So
like
sometimes
the like the humor, right?
I bet there's a lot of humor there. I bet there was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they weren't real taste not, touch not kind of guys. You know, they were all rough. They were rough hewn, like, you know, to use that term again. You know, they were experiential, gritty, gutty. You know, Paul was the scholar, but he wasn't with them at that point. And Paul had to sort of unlearn how. You talk about someone who went through deconstruction. Oh my Lord!
Sure.
Yeah, amazing.
Pauline deconstruction. That would be a good topic.
When Paul went, when he gave his life to the Lord, scripture says he went away to Arabia for 3 years. And he was undoing everything he had learned for the past 40 years. He was undoing it, unlearning it, and letting the Spirit of God bring it back to him the right way. And yeah, and I think that's an important thing is to have that time where you get away, like you said, Fred. You went months without even reading the Bible because there's a time that you got to spend away and just rethink, re-understand, let the Spirit of God inside of us work in our minds and our hearts.
I think
there's
go ahead.
That term reverse engineering, and that term reverse engineering is you scale it back, you go back from where you're at to the beginning, and then you remove malicious content. That's what it is when you in, I guess, in the computer or whatever it is world. I just read that definition, but I said, God, that's fantastic. We're going back to the scriptures, removing malicious content, you know, and then going on from there. But it's reverse engineering. That's another good word for deconstruction. You reverse engineering it, not to leave it behind, but to purge it, you know, and then go back forward again.
And yet people need permission for that because they've been told you can't question it.
That's right.
So don't question the church. Don't question the pastor. Don't question God. Well, the series I'm teaching, I start off with, you can question God. You can question the Bible. You can question the church. Question church authority. All of it's up for grabs. We just had All Saints Day today. You know, like seriously, Martin Luther knocking on that door, nailing the door. That was a serious start for deconstruction for another group of people. So this is not a new thing. Right.
Right.
But what I think happened with him, like we can learn from, he had wrestled with this, debated it, and finally became an item to be written down. And so for Fred to not read the Bible, however that was for his personal journey, I did the no prayer, no devotion thing because that was my hook. We need time to wrestle with some of these things before blurting it, because if we blurt thinking, we know in our heart something might be really true. We might hear a phrase from somebody that says it, so we repeat their phrase, but we have no context for the meaning of that phrase yet. And so I think a lot of people are talking too quick and not wrestling and bathing this revelation in the goodness of God. They're bathing it in their trauma of pain they've come from. There's a big difference.
You just described my process of talking, going through it some, but being that I needed to teach, I went and started teaching, but I was way ahead of, I wasn't experiencing everything yet. I was excited about it, but man, I would love someday to think about what happened, Randy, in Saudi Arabia for 3 years, because he doesn't talk about it.
Right.
It's not like he had to show up at class at 7:30 and took tests and pop quizzes. And it had to be more like the monasteries, the getting away and the contemplation and that's an amazing thing that part is left out. Yes. Because it's probably, I'm thinking, if we record it, if we record this, if this is written, all they're going to do is go duplicate it. All they're going to do is just take it and try to do the same thing, but it has to be different for every person. I'm thinking,
right. You'll make another regulation out of it. It'll be in the law, another regulation. Yeah.
There's
I think he just let the Lord love on him. At the end of the day, the 3 years was just his own experiential growth and knowledge of the Lord. And that ought to be what we're what we're aiming for. But somehow these regulations gets lost in the mix. And Bill at breakfast this morning, Bill was saying what amazes him about some of the progressives who would come and just have this entirely new revelation. Well, Jesus wasn't divine, or Jesus wasn't this, or Jesus was, huge things that even, he said, and yet they turn right around. They've changed their whole theology. They turn right around and continue to teach. And we were just talking at breakfast about how, well, wait a minute, but where are your 3 years in Arabia?
With that topic. Yes.
With that topic. Yeah.
Yep.
Let it, it's got to cook. It's still raw. I'm not wrong or right. It's still raw. And, to give things to cook it, let them cook in us and be willing to be silent and not say anything until it's perfected in you, at least perfected enough to the sense that you can start expressing it, in the right tone, in a tone that's from Jesus.
Bingo. Last time you talked about tenderness and how when the Holy Spirit really works a truth into you and works out the stuff that shouldn't be there, one of the biggest evidences is tenderness and kindness that comes out. Your tone will change.
The tone.
Absolutely. And oh my goodness. And you can't scream that out because then it would have the wrong tone. But it's a maturing thing for you. And that's hard because we're set up in this Western world that church is about building your platform, building a reputation, going denominational lines, or your group that you're in now lines, and without getting ostracized from even that group. Like, it's still happening all over the place. But I trust the tone and heart of somebody that I've gotten to know. Not just because then you can challenge it if you need to. You can have that quiet conversation. So you just don't do it all in public. So I wanted to bring up one point. I know we only got like 2.5 minutes left. The text in, I think it's 2 Peter 1, it talks about the journey of growing.
Yeah.
It's reflected in 2 John, I think, where it says, I speak to you children, and then I speak to young adults, and I speak to you adults. 3 stages of growing, which is really important. It's the teen, the young adult stage in that John text, 2 John. That is the wrestling out to work all this stuff out. So that's a needed step. But you go over to 2 Peter and you see how you gain understanding and patience, and add to your patience understanding, add to understanding this and this. It's a progressive adding, or I call it unveiling of what's in you already, so that you grow to have love for fellow believers, is what it says in one translation. Then the next phrase says, then you'll have an authentic love for everyone. Think, oh, there it is. You know, we're some people are stuck at believers because you're supposed to, but to really love everyone, that to me was really, really cool. And then it says, you may have forgotten that you already have been forgiven if these things aren't happening. It's like, what? So it's, again, really tied in. I know I'm putting a big bump at the end of the conversation, but the journey of growing up is so critical. And we can't let the church crap stop us. That can't be the trauma that defines us or prevents us from growing. It's just the things that get flicked off that, hey, that was never supposed to be there anyway. And just means a new journey. Ask the Holy Spirit to give you peace. So 30 seconds.
I would like to say something real quick.
Yeah.
Paul, we were talking about Paul. He, at one point, made a statement, and this is paraphrased. He said something like, I want you to know the love of God that is beyond knowledge. So in one sentence, Paul is saying, keep knowing the love of God and keep going after it, understanding him and knowing him. And in the same sentence, he's saying, you're never going to get there. There's always a more to his love that you can understand, that you can feel, that you can know. You're never going to arrive, but keep going after it.
Yep.
That's good. I posted something the other day. I love it. It's one of Einstein's thing when the mother asked him to see if he could if he could explain the theory of relativity to a child, and his response was, "Well, I can't explain it to a child. I can't explain it to a child, but I can play it on my violin." So then he played the song on his violin, and I think what we can do with the Lord is we can. It's the song of our heart. We can, and that gets back to the tone. Yep. I don't have all the answers. I don't need to give you all the answers. I don't need to have all the answers. But you know what? I have a song in my heart for the Lord's goodness, and this is the song, and it's that tenderness. So we got to wrap up. Okay.
Sorry, we'll come back to it. But thank you. That was really awesome. Join me next time on Still Growing in Grace. Enjoy previous episodes by downloading our podcast at growingingrace.ca. If this show has been an encouragement to you, consider making a donation today. For our Canadian link, visit growingingrace.ca, and for our USA link, visit eschurch.com. Your donation will help us continue spreading really good news. Thank you again for tuning in to